the Palace of Whispers, and the human who arrived. The grand palace of the Zarian Empire stretched across the alien city like a fortress carved from living crystal, its walls pulsing softly with energy drawn from the twin moons above. Inside this shimmering structure, fear and frustration had quietly taken root. The alien queen, known for her unmatched authority and sharp gaze, sat upon her obsidian throne surrounded by anxious advisors. For months, her royal twins had become the center of a storm that no one could control. They were young, gifted with wild telekinetic powers, and emotionally unpredictable. Their slightest tantrum could shatter windows, send furniture flying through the air, and trigger security alarms throughout the palace. Dozens of nannies had been hired from across the galaxy. Seasoned caretakers, strict military trainers, gentle empaths, even AI-assisted guardians, but every single one had fled, defeated and terrified. Some lasted a week, some only a day, and one particularly proud caretaker had resigned in tears within the first hour. Whispers ran through the corridors at night, stories of toys floating on their own, beds spinning like tornadoes, and eerie laughter echoing through the halls long after the children had gone to sleep. The queen's patience was fraying like a cracked blade. Her advisors begged her to use stricter methods. Some even suggested isolating the twins completely until they could be trained in secret. But the queen, beneath her icy demeanor, was still a mother, and the sight of her children's loneliness cut her deeper than any political wound. She stood before their massive nursery doors, listening to their chaotic energy ripple through the room like a storm. Every caretaker who entered those doors either broke down or disappeared, and with each failure, the twins grew more defiant. The palace staff began calling the nursery the haunted wing, and no one entered unless absolutely necessary. Then, on a night when the sky was split by a silent electric storm, a new worker arrived through the servant gates unnoticed by the nobles and advisors. He was a human from a distant colony world, a janitor named David Cole, carrying nothing but a worn mop, a bucket, and a quiet determination that seemed out of place in the extravagant alien palace. The guards barely looked at him as he was assigned to clean the lower halls. His steps echoed softly against the crystal floors as he explored his new environment. He had no knowledge of the chaos that lived behind the nursery doors, no idea of the whispers that kept the palace awake at night, and no plan to involve himself in royal matters. He simply intended to do his work, earn his credits, and keep his head down. But fate has a way of bending ordinary lives toward extraordinary moments. While making his way through the palace's north wing, David heard a faint crash followed by a chorus of childish alien laughter. Curious and concerned, he followed the sound. Turning down a hallway no servant dared to walk after sunset. The nursery doors stood slightly open, golden light spilling out into the dark hall like a warning. Inside, objects spun through the air like meteors caught in orbit. Furniture rose and fell as if pulled by unseen tides, and two small figures floated in the center. Laughing with wild energy, David stepped inside without hesitation, his mop dragging softly behind him. His calm presence contrasted sharply with the storm around him. The twins turned their glowing eyes toward the stranger, expecting him to scream or run like all the others, but he simply looked around, sighed like a tired father walking into a messy playroom, and said in a calm voice, "You two sure know how to make a mess." For the first time in months, the whirlwind slowed. The floating toys hovered in confusion. The furniture froze mid-air, and the twins stared at him, unsure of how to react to someone who wasn't afraid. David placed his bucket down and began cleaning the floor as if their chaos were nothing more than spilled water. His steady hands and relaxed posture were alien to them. In that quiet moment, the palace surveillance systems captured something remarkable. The twins stopped their mischief and watched him with silent curiosity. The storm that had driven away every nanny was, for the first time, interrupted not by fear or force, but by a human janitor who didn't flinch, unseen from her throne room. The alien queen leaned forward as the surveillance feed played before her. Her advisors whispered nervously, but her sharp eyes stayed fixed on the screen. She saw something no one else did. An unexpected stillness in her children's energy. A flicker of something different, something human. The arrival of the janitor had gone unnoticed by the galaxy. But within the palace walls, destiny had just shifted. The queen didn't know his name yet. The twins didn't know his story. But this quiet man would soon do what no one in the Empire had managed. He would not only survive their chaos, he would change it. And the galaxy, unknowingly, had just taken its first step toward a tale that would echo for generations. The first encounter. Chaos meets. Calm, the night was deep and silent when David returned to the nursery for his routine cleaning shift, unaware that his quiet presence earlier had already unsettled the palace's carefully maintained fear. As he entered the wide hallway that led to the twins' chamber, two guards whispered to each other nervously, warning him not to go in alone. They told him that no one entered the nursery twice willingly, that whatever strange luck he had before wouldn't last again. But David simply nodded and pushed the heavy crystalline doors open. Inside, the chaos had returned in full force. Toys spun in wild orbits like satellites around invisible planets. Books flapped their pages like frightened birds, and strange alien light patterns pulsed through the walls as if the room itself were alive. The twins floated near the ceiling, their laughter sharp and echoing as they directed the objects like tiny rulers of a storm. When they noticed him entering again, they exchanged a look that said they were about to break their new toy. The boy twin, slightly older and more mischievous, sent a wave of toys flying straight toward David, expecting the usual panic. But David ducked calmly, tilted his mop like a shield, and let the objects crash harmlessly behind him. He didn't scream, didn't flinch, didn't call for help. Instead, he picked up a broken toy block, examined it with mild disappointment, and said, "You're going to run out of toys at this rate?" The girl twin frowned, her glowing eyes narrowing in confusion. No one had ever spoken to them like that. Not their caretakers, not the soldiers, not even the queen herself. David then continued walking deeper into the room, dodging floating furniture as if he were strolling through a gentle breeze rather than a telekinetic storm. His mop swayed across the floor in slow arcs, wiping away spills of glowing alien paint the twins had created during their play. The twins tried to push harder, their powers intensified, and the room trembled as small objects started to hover in clusters above his head. But David simply looked up and said with a playful grin, "If you're going to throw it, at least aim better." His tone wasn't scared. It was like a father teasing his kids after a messy afternoon. This unexpected reaction broke the rhythm of their chaos. For the first time in a long while, the twins weren't controlling the situation. They were reacting. David picked up two soft plush toys from the floor, tossed one toward each twin with a casual flick. The plush toys gently hit them, surprising them more than any lecture could have. The twins burst into confused laughter, not their usual mischievous cackles, but something softer, almost genuine. Outside the nursery, guards and palace maids had gathered silently, expecting screams and explosions. Instead, they heard strange sounds, soft voices, calm footsteps, and occasional childlike giggles. One of the advisors leaned toward the surveillance screen, his jaw tightening in disbelief as the scene unfolded. David had somehow shifted the balance without even trying. The twins slowly floated down to his level, curious now rather than aggressive. David sat cross-legged on the clean section of the floor, pulled out an old human picture book from his work bag, a book his daughter used to love, and began reading in a steady, rhythmic voice. The alien language on the walls hummed softly. Their telekinetic energy stabilized, and the chaotic whirl around the room stilled like a pond after a stone has settled. The twins, who had chased away every trained caretaker with their powers, found themselves listening. Their glowing eyes reflected the warm light of the room as they leaned in closer, captivated not by magic or discipline, but by something they had never experienced before. Simple, unshakable calm. David didn't lecture them, didn't try to dominate them, and didn't show fear. He treated them like children, not royal burdens or dangerous forces. And in that moment, their power no longer ruled the room. His quiet humanity did. Meanwhile, deep within the throne chamber, The queen watched the live feed with narrowed eyes. Her advisors murmured that it was only temporary, that the humans' strange behavior would soon fail like the rest. But she said nothing. Her gaze was locked on the twins' faces, seeing something she hadn't seen in months: stillness, curiosity, even a hint of joy. She leaned back slowly, her mind turning with calculations she couldn't yet admit even to herself. This human janitor, who had entered her palace unnoticed, had done in minutes what elite caretakers and military trainers had failed to achieve, and though no one knew it yet, the silent bond forming in that nursery would soon challenge not only palace traditions, but the very foundation of her empire: the queen's challenge and the janitor's defiance. The next morning, the palace buzzed like a disturbed beehive. Whispers flowed through the corridors as servants exchanged stories about the human janitor who had spent the night in the twins' nursery and emerged unscathed. Some dismissed it as luck, others said the twins were playing a new game. But word reached the throne chamber quickly. The queen summoned her advisors and reviewed the surveillance footage again. Her sharp, calculating eyes studied every movement of David, the way he walked through chaos as if it were nothing, the way the twins calmed without force, and, most importantly, the way they looked at him with something close to respect. It was something she hadn't seen in them since the death of their father, the late king, whose presence had once been the only thing strong enough to keep their powers anchored. The queen sat upon her obsidian throne, surrounded by towering banners of the empire. When the guards escorted David into the grand hall, he walked across the gleaming floor, his janitor's uniform plain and worn against the backdrop of alien luxury. The courtiers sneered, unable to accept that a lowly human cleaner stood in the same chamber where diplomats and generals once trembled. David, however, carried himself with quiet steadiness, not arrogance, but not fear either. The queen's voice echoed like a blade drawn from a sheath as she demanded an explanation for his actions. She told him that the nursery was forbidden territory to anyone not assigned as caretaker, and that his decision to enter without permission was an act of reckless disobedience. David listened calmly and then answered in his plain, honest tone, saying he had only done his job, that the floor needed cleaning, and that the children needed calm more than rules. The court gasped at his bluntness, expecting the queen to strike him down. But instead, a strange silence fell over the hall. Her piercing gaze met his, testing him like a predator sizing up unexpected prey. For years, the queen had watched soldiers, teachers, and alien specialists break before the will of her children. She expected this human to show cracks, but he didn't. His words were neither polished nor strategic. They were simply true, and it caught her off guard. Slowly, she rose from her throne and descended the steps, her regal presence filling the hall like a tide. She stood before him, towering, her cloak trailing behind her like the night sky, and said that if he was so confident, then he would prove it. The queen announced before the entire court that David would become the temporary caretaker of the royal twins for 7 full days. Starting immediately, no guards would interfere. No other nannies would assist, and if he failed, he would be exiled from the palace and the planet for his insolence. A wave of laughter rippled through the nobles. Cruel, mocking laughter reserved for someone they believed would be crushed within hours. No human had ever been given such a position. Not even as a joke. David stood silently, absorbing the weight of the challenge. The queen's tone turned sharper as she added that every caretaker had failed, that he would soon understand the scale of what he was facing. But instead of backing down, David gave a small, almost amused smile and said, "I've cleaned worse messes." His simple words echoed through the hall like a spark in dry grass. Shocking everyone. The courtiers murmured in disbelief. The guards exchanged uneasy glances, and the queen narrowed her eyes, not out of anger, but curiosity. This was not the reaction she expected. She dismissed the court abruptly, leaving her advisors to whisper behind her. As she returned to her private chamber with thoughts swirling like storm clouds, outside the throne room, David walked through the palace corridors toward the nursery. Feeling the eyes of every servant, soldier, and official following him, some bet he wouldn't last until nightfall. Others pitied him for what was surely his impending failure. But David didn't carry the weight of their judgment. He wasn't a warrior, a diplomat, or a royal figure. He was a janitor, a man who had spent his life quietly fixing problems others ignored. And deep down, a part of him welcomed the challenge. The queen believed she had trapped him in a doomed role. But in truth, she had opened a door that no one in the empire had dared to unlock. And as the twins waited in their nursery, unaware of the formal decision, destiny began counting the days of a test that would change the palace forever. The trials of the twins. The moment David's 7-day trial began, the palace transformed into a silent theater where every corridor, guard post, and surveillance room became an audience to an unprecedented spectacle. No one truly believed the human janitor would last long. The alien twins were not ordinary children. They were the heirs to a galactic empire and possessed unstable telekinetic abilities that had grown increasingly wild since their father's death. Previous caretakers had approached them with discipline, fear, or advanced alien technology, but David brought none of these. He walked into the nursery on the first morning of his challenge carrying nothing but his mop, a cloth bag with a few old books, and the same calm demeanor that had puzzled the twins since their first encounter. The palace staff gathered quietly outside the nursery doors, ready to witness his downfall. The twins wasted no time. As soon as David entered, the boy twin created a sudden gravitational pulse that caused the floor to tilt unnaturally, sending loose objects sliding toward him like a tide of chaos. The girl twin followed by projecting illusions into the air. Holographic beasts with sharp teeth that roared in a chorus meant to terrify. It was a psychological and physical attack combined, enough to make even trained soldiers retreat. But David merely planted his feet, adjusted his grip on the mop, and said with the same half-amused tone, "You're going to have to try harder than that." His voice cut through their game like a steady anchor in a storm. And, to their surprise, he didn't just survive the attack, he adapted. He grabbed one of the sliding tables, flipped it upright, and used it as a moving shield while pushing through the illusionary beasts as if they were nothing more than fog. On the second day, they locked him in a gravity bubble that lifted him to the ceiling and spun him slowly upside down, expecting him to beg for release. Instead, David calmly tied his mop to the ceiling grid and began cleaning from that position, humming an old human tune while spinning gently in the air. The twins hovered below, watching in disbelief. Their tricks had always resulted in fear or scolding, but this human treated every challenge as part of his job, like he was cleaning up after particularly messy children rather than surviving dangerous tests. Their frustration grew, but beneath it, a new feeling crept in, curiosity mixed with respect. On the third day, they hacked into the palace AI's environmental controls and plunged the nursery into total darkness, then filled it with random telekinetic surges to create a terrifying labyrinth. The palace security team prepared to intervene, but David's voice came through the surveillance audio, calm and steady, telling the twins a story about how humans used to explore caves with nothing but torches. He used the sound of his mop tapping on the floor to navigate, moving slowly but surely toward their hiding spot. Instead of chasing them, he let his presence be known, allowing them to follow his voice like children listening to a bedtime tale. By the time the lights returned, they were sitting together in a corner, listening to him describe the stars above his home planet. By the fourth and fifth days, the twins escalated their pranks. They summoned small alien creatures through unauthorized teleporters to swarm the room. They reversed the gravity field to make furniture float uncontrollably, and they tried to teleport him onto the palace roof. David responded to each with a blend of cleverness and humor. When the creatures attacked, he used cleaning foam to trap them like bubbles, turning the chaos into a game. When the furniture floated, he anchored objects strategically so they formed a moving staircase, climbing through the room as if he were navigating a playground. And when he appeared on the palace roof due to their teleportation trick, he calmly cleaned the royal banners while waving at the guards below, as if he had planned to be there all along. Throughout these trials, something remarkable happened. The twins began to laugh, not their sharp, defiant laughter, but genuine, childlike joy. The palace staff, who had grown used to screams and alarms, started to hear the sounds of play coming from the nursery. Guards exchanged bewildered looks. Advisors stared at the footage in disbelief. The Queen watched every trial from her private chamber with silent intensity. Each night, she saw David survive not because of power or status, but because of resilience, creativity, and a strange unshakable patience that no one in her empire had ever shown her children. By the end of the 5th day, the twins no longer viewed David as a target. They began to anticipate his arrival, hovering near the door like mischievous siblings waiting for their favorite uncle. They still challenged him, but now it was different. Their chaos became playful rather than destructive, and their glowing eyes, once filled with defiance, now carried a spark of trust. The palace, once ruled by the fear of their power, began to change quietly, day by day. The janitor's quiet methods were dismantling walls that the Empire's might could never break. And in the Queen's eyes, this human was no longer just a janitor. He was becoming something far more dangerous and precious, someone capable of touching the untamed hearts of her royal heirs. The Night of Truth and the twins' hidden pain. The palace had grown strangely quiet as David's trial entered its 6th night. The corridors that once echoed with alarms and panic now carried soft murmurs of disbelief. Servants spoke of the human janitor as if he were a myth in the making. Guards who had once avoided the nursery now lingered nearby, listening to the sounds of laughter that had replaced chaos. Even the advisors, who had dismissed him as a temporary amusement, began to exchange uneasy glances, realizing that something deeper was unfolding. But beneath the surface of this calm, David had started noticing something different in the twins' behavior during the quiet hours. When their games ended and the palace lights dimmed, a shadow of sadness would settle over them. Their telekinetic powers, usually wild and untamed, became subdued, almost hesitant, as if they were hiding something behind their playful defiance. That night, after finishing his routine cleaning, David found the twins sitting by the nursery window, gazing at the twin moons that hovered over the alien capital. Their usually glowing eyes seemed distant, their energy low. For the first time, they didn't greet him with mischief or tricks. Instead, the boy twin asked in a soft, trembling voice, "Why aren't you afraid of us like everyone else?" David paused, setting down his mop, and walked toward them slowly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat on the floor beside them, looking out at the stars with the same quiet patience he had shown since his arrival. Then he spoke gently, telling them that where he came from, children made messes too, that chaos didn't scare him because chaos only means someone needs to clean up with care. His words were simple, but they carried a weight that pierced the silence like light through darkness. The girl twin lowered her head, her voice trembling as she whispered that everyone had left them, that no one stayed, not even the strongest soldiers or the kindest caretakers. She confessed that after their father died, everyone began to look at them differently, as if their powers were dangerous rather than special. She said that sometimes they caused chaos not because they wanted to, but because it was the only way people noticed them. David listened without interrupting, his heart tightening as their words painted a picture of two lonely children trapped behind the walls of their own abilities. They weren't monsters. They were grieving, misunderstood, and afraid of being abandoned again. David took a deep breath and shared something he hadn't told anyone in the palace. He spoke about his own daughter, how she had died years ago in a mining accident back on his colony, how he had come to this distant world because he couldn't bear staying in a home filled with memories of laughter that would never return. His voice didn't tremble. It carried the quiet ache of a man who had accepted his pain but never stopped loving. The twins listened intently, their telekinetic aura dimming into a soft, warm glow. For the first time, they saw not just a janitor, but someone who understood loss like they did, someone who carried invisible wounds. As he spoke, the boy twin slowly floated down and sat beside him, followed by his sister. Their usual restless energy faded as they leaned against his shoulders, a gesture they had never made with anyone else. David didn't move or make a grand speech. He simply wrapped his arms around them gently, holding them the way a father might hold his children after a nightmare. In that moment, something powerful shifted, not just between them, but within the walls of the nursery itself. The storm that had raged in their hearts for so long finally began to settle. Unseen by any of them, the queen stood behind a hidden viewing panel, watching with unblinking eyes, her hands tightened around the edge of the frame as she witnessed her children show a vulnerability she thought had died with their father. She saw the human, not as a servant, but as a bridge, something no alien technology or royal decree had managed to create. Her advisors had told her that the twins needed control, power, and structure, but here was a simple man, through shared pain and quiet love, giving them something far more potent: understanding. That night, the twins fell asleep against David's side, their breathing steady, their powers completely calm for the first time in years. The nursery, once feared as the heart of the palace's storms, now felt like a sanctuary. David carefully laid them down, covered them with soft blankets, and sat for a moment in silence. Looking at their peaceful faces, he knew then that this trial was no longer about proving himself to the queen or surviving the palace. It was about protecting these children who had finally let someone into their broken world. Outside, the alien moons drifted slowly across the sky, unaware that within the walls of a royal nursery, a bond had been formed that would soon challenge the destiny of an empire. The palace under siege. A night of betrayal and courage. The seventh day of David's trial began with a sense of strange stillness. The palace, once noisy with rumors and doubtful whispers, had grown quiet, as if everyone was holding their breath, even the queen, who had watched every moment of his time with the twins from her private chamber, found herself silently wondering how this human had endured so much without faltering. The twins had changed in ways no one could have predicted. They greeted David each morning with smiles rather than telekinetic assaults. Their powers had become stable. Their tantrums had softened. And, for the first time in years, their laughter carried warmth rather than rebellion. Yet, beneath this calm, something dark was brewing in the unseen corners of the palace. Among the queen's advisors were those who viewed the twins not as children, but as unstable weapons. And to them, the idea of a human janitor becoming their caretaker was a humiliation to the empire's pride. In their fear and arrogance, they had conspired to remove what they saw as a dangerous variable before it could influence the royal future further. As the twin moons rose and painted the sky with pale light, a group of masked intruders infiltrated the palace through forgotten maintenance tunnels. They were well-trained, moving silently through the lower corridors, their goal clear and merciless: to eliminate the twins before their powers could spiral out of control. The conspirators believed the queen would have no choice but to accept their act as a necessary evil once it was done. At that same hour, David was in the nursery, reading from his old book while the twins huddled beside him, drifting between laughter and drowsy yawns. The soft hum of alien lullabies filled the room as he slowly closed the book and began tidying the toys scattered across the floor. That was when he heard it. A faint metallic click followed by the subtle vibration of footsteps that didn't belong to palace staff. Years of working in harsh environments had sharpened David's instincts. He turned off the nursery lights and whispered to the twins to stay silent. Their eyes widened as the atmosphere shifted from comfort to quiet tension. A moment later, the nursery doors opened without a sound, and figures in black armor slipped inside like shadows. Their weapons glimmered faintly. Designed to suppress telekinetic energy and kill quickly, David's heart pounded. But his movements were deliberate. He wasn't a soldier, but he had spent a lifetime fixing problems others overlooked, and tonight he would fix the most dangerous one of all. He picked up a long metal pole from his cleaning equipment and positioned himself between the twins and the intruders. The first assassin lunged, expecting an easy kill, but David sidestepped and swung the pole into the attacker's knees, sending him crashing down with a grunt. The twins gasped, their powers flaring instinctively, but David raised a hand, signaling them to stay back. The attackers regrouped, advancing in coordinated formation. They underestimated him, believing him to be just a janitor. But David used the environment like a seasoned tactician. He kicked over rolling cleaning bins, used mops as makeshift spears, and knocked out lights to control visibility. His movements were not elegant, but they were sharp and decisive. Years of physical labor had made him strong, his reflexes quick and his resolve unshakable, one by one. He disabled them through a mix of improvisation and sheer grit. Every strike was made with the determination of a man who had already lost a child and refused to lose again. The twins, trembling but focused, stayed behind him as he had told them, their trust in him absolute. But the final intruder, realizing the operation was failing, activated a small energy detonator meant to destabilize the room's gravity field. The floor began to twist unnaturally, furniture flew upward, and the walls groaned as the nursery transformed into a disorienting battlefield. David felt the pull of distorted gravity, but he clenched his teeth and pushed through, dragging the twins toward the reinforced corner of the room. The detonator's light grew brighter, promising disaster. Without hesitation, David grabbed a heavy cleaning canister filled with compressed water vapor and hurled it at the device. The impact triggered a controlled explosion that sent a shockwave through the room, knocking the assassin unconscious but saving the twins from the gravitational collapse. When the palace guards finally arrived, they found the scene in chaos. Broken equipment, unconscious intruders, and David standing in the center, battered, breathing heavily, but still protecting the royal heirs. The twins clung to his legs, their powers flickering with fear but directed entirely toward him for reassurance. It was a sight that no one in the Empire had ever imagined. A human janitor standing against trained assassins and winning. News of the attack spread like wildfire through the palace. Advisors rushed to the queen with trembling voices, unsure how to explain how this human had defended her children when elite guards had failed. The queen left her chamber and walked through the corridors with a storm in her stride. Her guards pushed the crowd aside as she entered the nursery. Her sharp eyes scanned the room, taking in the unconscious intruders, the damaged walls, and finally, David, standing tall with the twins wrapped around him. Something inside her shifted as she looked at the man who had done what no one else could in that single night. The bond between David and the twins was no longer just emotional. It had been forged through danger, courage, and sacrifice. The palace had witnessed the moment a simple janitor became their protector, and the queen, though silent, knew the empire would never be the same again. A new guardian, a new dawn for the empire. The morning after the assassination attempt, the palace was transformed into a place of hushed awe. Soldiers patrolled every hallway with renewed vigilance. Advisors gathered in tight circles whispering about what had happened, and servants moved quietly as if the very walls were listening. For the first time in years, the empire had witnessed something truly unexpected. Not a military triumph, not a technological breakthrough, but the courage of a single human janitor who stood between death and the royal heirs. The twins clung to David as he walked through the halls, their small hands gripping his sleeves with absolute trust. They refused to leave his side, even when palace healers tried to check his injuries. Their once defiant, untamed energy had changed into something new, protective, loyal, and deeply bonded, and throughout the palace, whispers began to spread that the royal twins, who had once driven away the strongest warriors and most skilled caretakers, now looked at a human cleaner as their guardian. The queen summoned the entire royal court to the grand hall, a vast chamber where towering banners of the empire hung between glowing pillars. The floor shimmered like liquid glass as nobles, military commanders, foreign ambassadors, and palace staff assembled, unaware of the announcement to come. David stood before the throne wearing his simple uniform, bruises on his arms and a faint bandage on his forehead. The twins stood on either side of him, their glowing eyes fixed on the queen. The crowd buzzed with disbelief, some outraged, some curious, some silently admiring. The queen rose from her throne, her cloak flowing behind her like a storm cloud, and with a single raised hand, silence spread through the hall like a wave. Her voice carried power and cold precision as she recounted the events of the night, the infiltration, the betrayal, the failed security, and above all, the human who had risked everything to protect her children. As her words echoed through the chamber, many advisors lowered their heads in shame. Soldiers clenched their fists, and nobles exchanged uneasy glances. The queen descended from her throne and stood face to face with David. Her eyes, once sharp with suspicion, now held something far more complex: respect, curiosity, and an emotion she rarely allowed anyone to see: gratitude. She addressed him not as a servant, but as an equal in that moment. She declared before the entire court that David Cole, the human janitor, had done what entire battalions and specialized caretakers could not. He had not only kept the twins safe, he had changed them, calmed them, and given them something the Empire had forgotten how to provide. With her voice steady and commanding, she announced that David would no longer serve as a janitor. From that day forward, he would be appointed as the royal guardian of the heirs, a position of honor never before held by a human. The declaration rippled through the hall like a shockwave. Nobles gasped, military commanders exchanged stunned looks, and even the palace AI recorded a spike in emotional fluctuations among the crowd. But no reaction was as powerful as that of the twins. They ran forward and embraced David tightly, their small hands clutching his coat as their glowing eyes filled with joy. It was not the formal embrace of royal heirs toward a protector, but the unfiltered love of children toward someone they truly trusted. The queen looked at this display, and for a fleeting moment, her hardened expression softened. She saw something that had been missing in the palace since the king's death: her children's genuine happiness. She turned to the court and declared that strength is not only found in power, weapons, or status, but in courage, patience, and heart. Her words carried the weight of imperial authority, silencing any voice that dared to question her decision. That evening, the palace held a quiet ceremony in the nursery. Now restored after the attack, the queen herself placed a ceremonial crest on David's uniform, marking him as the guardian. The twins beamed with pride, standing beside him as if announcing to the universe that their world had changed. As the twin moons rose once more, their light filled the room with a gentle glow. David looked at the two children beside him, once wild storms, now steady lights, and felt a quiet warmth spread through his chest. He had arrived at this palace to mop floors and remain unseen, yet he now stood at the heart of a legacy that would be told for generations. Throughout the Empire, the story of the human guardian began to spread. Whispers turned into songs, songs into legends, and soon, even distant star systems spoke of the janitor who defied fear, won the trust of royal heirs, and stood before assassins to protect them. The queen, once feared for her coldness, now watched her children grow under the care of someone who had no titles, no power, and no political agenda, only heart, and in the silent corners of the palace she allowed herself to smile, knowing that destiny had brought an ordinary man to do something extraordinary. The Empire had gained not just a protector for its heirs, but a living reminder that sometimes the greatest strength lies in simple humanity, and that one person's quiet courage can reshape the stars.